First question, what would you like us to call you? Second question, what are your ancestral waters? It could be a lake, a river, a pond, a stream. What is the water that you consider home? In whatever way you'd like to answer that. What is your name? And what is the water where you consider home?
My name is Ashik. You can all call me Ashik. When I was young, I used to live, like a small town, much like a village. So we had like 2 large ponds. And when I think about home, that image always is in my mind, just by the coconut tree. Thank you.
My name is Frank, and ancestral water for me would be the All-American Canal. I remember that very vividly, both because it, for the smell, because it's one of the most polluted waters in North America, and it was really fully because it was polluting the levels.
My name is Bernardina Hernandez, and the Rio Grande River.
Hi, my name is Karma, and I grew up in rural Nebraska, in the territory of the Pawnee, and so the Platte River is certainly what I think of.
My name is Caleb, and I think the first body of water that comes to mind is the Calaveras Lake in San Antonio, and how there is a coal plant there, and it's the largest building for miles around, and that's the only thing you see, and it's the only thing you remember in that area. And you cannot fish there, or you can, but you have to throw the fish back in because there's
I'm Mariana, and it's the water. It's also the Rio Grande River.
I'm Erin Crittenden, and I'm originally from South Dallas. I think the only body of water close to me would be Joe Cole Lake in Cedar Hill, in Texas. So like I just remember like as a kid, whenever I was going straight to Mansfield or like to my cousin's house in Cedar Hill, we would drive on the scenic route past Joe Cole Lake, and that's like I still love it to this day.
My name is Rosangela Boyd. I was born in Rio de Janeiro, so I remember being blackmailed by my mom to drink milk so we could go to the beach the next day. And so the beach was a pretty big deal for me, so that the beaches along the shore, the Guanabara Bay at night.
Hi everyone, I'm Michael Gomez, and I am thinking, I'm born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. So of course the first thing to think about is the San Francisco Bay, and the peoples of that area, the Ohlone, Miwok, and Ka'ai people that are still there.
Hi everyone, I'm Stacy. I grew up in Mississippi, and from the age of 2 to 4, I lived in Vicksburg, right along the Mississippi River. And my mom was in transit, and she was deciding where she wanted to live and plant roots. But the one thing that she used to do, and I just
ditch that has a little bit of concrete and a little bit of not concrete, so we like to call it a creek. And right now, when I left the house earlier, it was flowing because of all the rain, so it's like the sort of zen part of the backyard. So it's kind of the place now.
My name's Hennessy. I grew up in Idaho, and there was a river near my house growing up, and my brothers and I would always go and swim it. And there was this log that would like jump out over it, and it would always like scare my mom by jumping off of it into the river. And it was like a safer part of the river, so it's kind of like I would call that home.
I'm Hannah. I grew up along different places on the East Coast. So I probably say the Atlantic Ocean because that's where I was supposed to.
My name is Orlando Lara. Body of water for me that I associate with my parents' town, Salamanca, Guanajuato, is the river called Rio Lerma. It has little canals. One of them goes all through kind of a hill community. It's called Puerto de Valle, where my dad is from, and that's where I have some of the strongest memories of body of water. Other than the Rio Bravo, right? But I'd rather someone than Rio Lerma.
My name is Eliza, and I also grew up on the East Coast, so I would also name the Atlantic Ocean. I grew up in a town right near the ocean, and we had to drive over a bridge to go to our house every day. And now my dad, we actually put his ashes in the Atlantic Ocean because he was a big sailor, so it is where my dad is now too.
Thank you everyone for sharing. My name is Maria de Los Angeles, but I go by Angeles. And I was raised and born in Mexico. My little town is called Nachona, but they have a really nice river that crosses by our town. And I grew up, looking at the water, and during, the rainy season, it was like really beautiful to just, go out there, have a, family gathering near the river. So I don't know what's the name of the river, but that's where, that's what comes to mind. But now I live also in a town that has a river that crosses the town that's called San Antonio. So nice.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Please, the mic. That's okay. So my name is Marisa. The water that comes to mind is Rio Grande, Rio Bravo. Thank you for sharing all of those details. That was purely indulgent to afford Orlando some time to make sure that we had tech ready to go. The research that I write is being able to identify ancestral knowledge and identity that grows from ancestral knowledge specific to water. And so it's a question I find that really brings people centered and brings people home where you're thinking. And as you're sharing, you're connecting in kind of energy and spirit ways to your people, wherever they are, you bring them with you, right? And so thank you for sharing. Because what we're going to talk about today are all of those ways that we make space for each other to be completely holistic, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, entire beings as we move forward in doing ethnic studies work, right? Which also means making space for lots of different ways of knowing and being, and within academic spaces especially, being able to disrupt these big spaces and institutions that don't allow for so much variety. So I'm really glad that you could join us all, like all the hardcore. Man, this is like the last session.
I wish I had some good stuff for y'all.
We're good. We're good. Okay. Yes. So I did want to just call your attention. We had some really wonderful other members of our larger team that were intending to be here with us. We didn't have the heart to remove them from some of the slides. You will see the faces and the beautiful folks that we connect with and think collectively with. So on this slide, you can see Richard Thomas, who is a practicing teacher and has other commitments today. Here we go. So first things first, I want to have free, prior, informed consent, enthusiastically given. Give me the thumbs up. If it's okay with you that I am recording our conversation, what we practice is the opposite. We enact things on the ground and in community and with each other and collective think, and what we're not good at doing is documenting all the bits and pieces that we have in the air juggling at any given time. So we theorize from practice. What we're doing with this Zoom meeting, no one's on it, it's just us, but it produces a transcript that we can then mold and edit and do what we need to turn it into a manuscript to document our ethnic studies pedagogy. Right? The confession that you hear, all these practices, is that I am a tried and true in my heart 6th grade teacher. And what I do now is I teach folks how to be middle grades science teachers. I work at UTSA. I'm really thrilled to put up with all kinds of stuff in the day job, because the work that we're going to share today is really purposeful and centering and inclusive, right, of who I am as a whole human, and that feels really nurturing. Yeah. Okay. So land and ancestor acknowledgement. This is one that we typically use when we're presenting across the entire state in a big way. The Ethnic Studies Network of Texas acknowledge the Wichitan-affiliated tribes whose traditional territory we are currently meeting on. We also acknowledge the Coahuiltecan, Lipan-Apache, Kankwa, Kickapoo, Comanches, and other Native nations whose shared history on and care of these lands. We practice meaningful commitments of reciprocity to both land and water and the communities that continue to organize in defense of Mother Earth. ESNTX also acknowledges the harm of colonialism and white supremacy that have been brought to these lands, including the legacy of slavery in our region, and the many people whose labor was and continues to be exploited, right, for generations to help establish the economy of the United States. It's only by recognition and understanding of these histories that we can hope to build a mutually free future. At this time, just the same way that we did with your ancestral waters, the same way that Stacy modeled to us yesterday, think about one or two ancestors that you just want to hold in your heart as we have our conversation. So we do not only the land acknowledgement, but the ancestor acknowledgement, because we all carry ancestral knowledge. So wherever home is, let there be a little part of you right here, right now. Okay. Here's the general overview of what we're up to. I don't have to turn this. The Ethnic Studies Network of Texas is a community-based collective of differently identifying and differently positioning students, teachers, parents, caretakers, and advocates. We are moved to create the emancipatory ethnic studies that we want to see in the world. In this panel, we honor our stories of solidarity and invite community conversation. So what you'll notice is that I've done this very pedagogically, the way that I do lots of things, where we'll share bits and pieces where you have a general vocabulary and framework, and then there's definitely going to be parts where you get to converse with the folks around you. We can even get up and move around and form other groups as we roll through some of these different pieces. Good? Everyone's good? Okay. So, for those of us who do like the heavy-duty theoretical practice, here's what we're talking about. Our work demonstrates the intuitive fluidity of serpentine conocimiento and critical storying practices that embrace perpetual transformation in response to the needs of our communities. Our collective manifests a revitalization of collective knowledges, of solidarity, and of responsibility, not one word responsibility. It's a phrase of responsibility, our ability to respond. To the next generation, visioning a holistic approach to education that includes enlivening the ancestral knowledges in each of our communities. So thank you for sharing your home waters. Thank you for inviting your elders with you. This is all part of our praxis. These are some of my favorite people. Period. This is our hardcore core team of folks who've been doing this for what, 4 years now? 5 years now?
Officially, but like a long time.
Oh, honest to God. With roots that connect to this same organization that arranged us for this symposium, right, these past couple of days. Which is to say, people that are committed and really generous with their time and energies to do something around really visioning what can this look like. So when we're talking about building a praxis, right? Praxis is the practice of theory, or how do we enact these beliefs, where it's not just a concept, but how do you then embody and feel it and do the thing? It's a practice of solidarity. It takes a village. And so rather than offer up a list of definitions, what we decided to do was be very responsive the way that we often do. The question we came up with, how have we lived through and embodied solidarity through our work as members of the Ethnic Studies Network Texas? So what you have on the visual also is a brief timeline, the briefest timeline. But I'd really like to invite my colleagues to each share, if you don't mind. How have we lived through and continued to embody this work? What does solidarity mean to you?
I'm gonna go first. I'm using the microphone because I'm wearing a mask and I don't know if you can hear as well. Not because I want to hear my voice amplified. So I'm gonna start with this first piece in the timeline, and this isn't the beginning of the Ethnic Studies Network of Texas. As Marisa mentioned, that grew out of a bunch of different people's efforts, but specifically Orlando's here at TCU and the support that Crest gave to him. So what emerged from this event that I'm going to talk a little bit about, the 2020 Ethnic Studies web series, was that group of 8 people that you just saw, which we call our core organizing team. And they are teachers of solidarity. And so I want to talk just through how that sort of formed and what we were being responsive to. And then we'll move on through some of this timeline. Will you go to the next slide? Thank you. So in 2018, the Texas State Board of Education passed Mexican American Studies as a course that would be available to high school students all over the state. And at the same time called for additional ethnic studies courses to come forward. And while much of the organizing group that worked on the Mexican American Studies course went to do the implementation because of course this course was approved but not supported in any way. So that group went on to try to implement this process. And a man named Trini Gonzalez, who lives in the Rio Grande Valley, he reached out to a bunch of people to try to bring forth some of these other courses to see if there was interest in developing the new courses. He reached out to Orlando, and Orlando was really excited to talk about ethnic studies as a broader community. And at the same time, an African American Studies course was being developed in Dallas. So in November of 2019, it began the process at the State Board for this African American Studies course. And at that meeting at the State Board of Education, I met Shalon Bond, who was the social studies coordinator at Dallas ISD, who was deeply involved in developing this course alongside Jamila Thomas, who's the person in red on the far side of that image, who used to work in Dallas ISD. She started the Race and Equity Office in Dallas ISD, or was integral in starting that. And I talked to Shalana and I said, how many campuses are teaching this course right now? Because they were piloting it. And you know, she said 8 or 9 campuses, and I said, how many campuses do you want next year? And she said, all of them. And I said, well, how are you gonna, like, what's the plan? Is there PDs? Like, how are you gonna get teachers? Because what we know about ethnic studies, even nationally in California, where it's a requirement now, is that there's not certificates. There's not university level training. You can be an ethnic studies scholar, but to be a social studies teacher, which is where ethnic studies lives in Texas, you just have to have a social studies credential. So how to support the districts, how to support the teachers. And so we wanted to do a professional development, but that brought together the two groups rather than doing them in isolation. To say there is the most incredible professional development in San Antonio, run by a group of people at UTSA, one of them being the person second from the right, Liliana Saldaño, who runs the most incredible, beautiful Mexican American Studies educator community development program, which I had attended. And so I started talking to Shalon about this, and we started planning this professional development, and then a pandemic happened. And that's when I came to some of these folks, and we were in this like moment of like, I don't know, do you remember March 2020? Like nobody knew what was going on. And it was this moment of opportunity, like what can this look like? And a bunch of the people, we sort of reached out to people in different ways.
I reached out to 4 different professors at TCU and said, we're gonna do this web series. We think it's gonna last a week, but we're trying to bring together university folks, community folks, museum directors, K-12 educators, students, activists, homeschool parents. Like, we wanna bring everyone together and just share this knowledge, be in the same space, learn from each other. And I got 4 responses, and they were all, yep, tell us when to be there, we'll be there. From Dr. Kennard, Dr. Colon, Dr. Gooding, and who's the other person? No, I don't want to forget who this other person is. I'll think of it. No, because she's not at TCU.
Oh, you mean at TCU?
Yeah, there was a, anyway, all to say is that the university community, who? Dr. Manning? Oh, yeah, also him. No, there was someone else too. But all to say that, like, all like questions about what can the institution do, like, these people in the institution were like, yes, show me where to be and I'll be there. And we got that response from around the state. So we had over 100 people attend, with an average of 50 people attending a day for 5 days. This was like early days of Zoom, so people wanted to show up for Zooms. We could not do this now. But we had 30 breakout sessions. We had 2 like large groups, 30 over the course of 5 days. We did 2 days devoted to Mexican American Studies, 2 days to African American Studies, and a day devoted to Afro-Latino Studies. We had content, we had K-12 experts workshopping standards with university professors. We had advocacy panels centering and sustaining ethnic studies in public schools that brought together districts and activists. We had students that took both of the courses from the Dallas schools, from the Austin schools, San Antonio schools, that ran their own panels. And then our final panel, which kind of portended what moved forward, was called Not Just a Moment, a Movement. How are we gonna carry this work forward? And so that was, and from that, like, then when we finished, we were all like, okay, what do we do next? What do we do next? And so that's when the core team really gelled. And since then, we've, transformed some of our approaches. So, we didn't run that web series again like that. I think we couldn't, and also we just try to be more responsive to what we hear from people is needed. And I think that's an important part of solidarity, is listening. We'll talk more.
I'm not sure what to add, but
No, go.
were you moving through?
Yeah, because these were other slides. These are
Oh, yeah,
some
you
of
can
the,
move.
but I was passing you to talk about the convergence.
Oh, the convergences, yeah.
Forward or backward?
Wait, go forward. These are just some examples of things
Maybe
that
just-
we had. I forgot we had other slides. Looking at those beautiful faces, I didn't want to go forward.
This was like every day we had a DJ who would play music during the breaks, and Angeles and Dee, who's not here, designed these slides. We had new slides like this every day. Oh, and okay, so this is now actually a school board member in Austin ISD, and the 4th day of our sessions, I forgot to make Zoom breakout room for him. He was doing a Zoom breakout, and this was like, we couldn't do anything. Everyone went to their breakout rooms, and it was just us with Andrew, and we said, well, just do your presentation with us. And he said, I'm so sorry, I'm parked in a McDonald's parking lot because I was driving to see my family and I can't go inside anywhere, but McDonald's has Wi-Fi, and so I'm sitting outside the McDonald's in my car using their Wi-Fi. And then he was teaching us about his grandmother and his family history, and we did these like group pair shares, and it was Cecilia and Angeles and Orlando and Dee, and that was like, we came together because we did this activity together. And it was this like, I had this moment of like, it's like the Harney and Moten, like, we're stealing from the institution. We're having a criminal relationship with institutions. I love this. So yeah, those are my slides. I'm done.
Just want to acknowledge that, realize this work. This was kind of related to doctoral dissertation, but very much put a lot of time and energy into making that web series happen together like this. But I guess just to transition a little bit, it's one thing, as we all know, to do this work in community when there's a broader mass movement that's kind of pushing you forward, and you don't always have that in your favor. And I think the following year was when the anti-CRT, I confuse all these SB3s and 4s. The SB3?
SB 39.
HB 3979, the bill that was trying to censor a beta version of CRT, which I think now folks know quite a bit about. And at that point, we kind of transitioned from more of a pedagogical model of let's give folks a crash course in ethnic studies to a more of a movement building model because we knew that we were facing real backlash. So we turned the web series into a convergence, which is really more of a space for, we kept the learning, the skill sharing, but also just a space for folks to come together. They're doing all this work on ethnic studies, kind of autonomously, to just update each other on what they're doing, and then creating some guideposts for some shared priorities and strategies. And also just kind of like, because at that point, folks were just starting to think about how do we respond to all this. And at that point, if y'all remember, some folks were not taking it super seriously. We didn't know what to do with this sudden backlash and how long it was going to last, right? But we were starting to think about how do we take care of each other through this moment that we don't know how long it's going to last. So we for the past 3 years, we've done summer convergences roughly around this model. But the idea has not been, even though I think slowly within the K through 12 space, I think folks are recognizing the network as kind of like a hub where folks come together. But we didn't really imagine ourselves as like, this is like the decision-making headquarters for ethnic studies. Like, we didn't think that that's what, how folks saw us, and it's not what we were trying to aspire to. But we did want to have a space for folks to just share ideas and to get to some point where we can identify shared needs and things that we could do together. So that's kind of been the role of the convergence every year since then. The following year, in 2020, there was a big project and this was mentioned yesterday, to review the social studies standards for K through 12. And so we put out a call out to invite people to sign up for the working groups, and people really responded to that. We managed to get like, what, 40 people into these working groups, and some of them were the ethnic studies courses. The new ones are being developed, and also the existing courses that we're going to be reimagining. And some really beautiful work came out of that, by the way. There's a really great Mexican American Studies update that came out in 2022. It's still available, much more decolonial than the approved version. If anyone's teaching Mas at the high school level, that look at that revision, that's a good model. But that was discarded. But once we kind of got word that the State Board of Ed was moving towards pretty much throwing away what was thousands of hours of work of how many working groups? No, for all of social studies. It was like, I don't know, 10, 12, all volunteers. Our taxpayer money paid for their hotel in Austin. And this is around the time few moms of liberty were coming to the State Board. Don't even have to make coherent arguments. They just have to show up. 2 or 3 of them had to show up, and that was enough to, with a lot of like verbal emails on the side, I think. But yeah, they managed to push the State Board of Ed to pretty much throw that project in the dustbin. And all that work is still available online, but they didn't move forward with it. So what we developed around that time very quickly was the Ethnic Studies for Texas Schools Coalition. Before that point, it was largely us as a core team. We were coordinating, we had members, and we had monthly meetings and things like that. And we had some organizations there, but we didn't really have a space that was more of an organizational space where organizations come in, we kind of talk to each other as organizations. So we created that coalition and started working together, and we've kept that going for the past
year and a half.
Right. But really what the part of the reason that we went that way is that after going through the SB3 experience and realizing, and I think Karma, you would, I think something similar with the DEI, where you could get all these calls in, you show up to do all the things you're supposed to do, to use your voice as a citizen, do the best arguments, create all the best talking points that you can with a limited time. And these folks are like, they have their narrative in their head, and they're going to stick with their fake information. So it became very clear to me, definitely, I think all of us, that we couldn't do this alone, and that we did need to be more intentional about working with other organizations, more established organizations, and also all the new organizations that were popping up. Because that's the one of the bright sides of these backlashes is that every year there's more organizations forming and creating their own sort of strategies and approaches. So we kind of put that together. Can we go one more? So we've kind of, throughout this process, we are doing some of the kind of the reflexive work of trying to think through what is our role as a network, what are we doing, and we created maps like this, trying to map things at the national level, and at the same time, there's so much that's getting built right now for ethnic studies that in a sense it is actually kind of exciting, even though it's also scary. So now there is a national coalition for liberated ethnic studies for K through 12, which didn't exist just like four years ago. So we're connected with them. You can, yeah. And obviously this is old, we could update this, but there are so many more organizations now doing amazing work. Texas Students for DEI, Students Engaged at the Table, like Asian Texans for Justice. And, the video.
So both the blurry shot that you see there, and then also the icon for the Grande Project, the narrative, are student-led groups where they're creating their own media and they're talking about how important ethnic studies is from their own voices. And so with very little us adults maybe necessarily shaping how they narrate their experience through ethnic studies, they're creating these really interesting mixed media, multimedia. And the way that young people are so sensitive to protect each other, the blurry image that you see is on purpose because they know it's fraught territory. And their idea was, you need to hear my voice, but you don't need to follow me. So they let themselves be blurred. But even some of those really aesthetic choices is just fresh and interesting and protective of the collective.
Thank you. And also, just these are organizations that are popping up. They're like pop-up organizations. No, there's and a lot of our role is just giving folks a space to come together. So Grande Narrative out of RGB. A lot of this too in response to the George Floyd protests. They had their own situation in the Rio Grande Valley where a guy pulled out a store owner pulled out a chainsaw on somebody, and that kind of catalyzed that. But also ephemerals, these groups come into being, they come out of being, and we just continue to work with the folks as they stick around. Can you go to the next one? So as far as the coalition, we're starting to work a little bit more intentionally with some of the larger orgs that we're already supporting, but we just didn't really have the space to actually strategize together. So organizations have been super supportive. Texas AFT, TSTA is actually funding the AIDS project that you guys heard about yesterday. Texas Freedom Network has been working against Christian nationalists, sort of like attempt to take over schools for 20 years now. It's not a new project. And IDRA has been, doing this work for a long time. And of course, the group that really kind of started K through 12 ethnic studies, the K through 12 ethnic studies movement in Texas, the Knox Texas Focal. So we're there. I'll leave it there and talk for a while. So.
Well, I'm going to also talk about what solidarity meant for, for part of our community, because as Orlando was saying, there was all of this legislative sessions that were happening, all of these bills happening. The coalition was very involved in doing the work and sending action calls and emails, and a community member or a Niñas NTX core member and we were like, but like we're doing all this work for the institution, like we're forgetting about us as a community, right? And we wanted to make sure that we were reaching out to our community members and being intentional about, hey, how are you doing? Because there's all of these things happening in the institution, in the state, and we often forget about, our 800 members that are like what's it called? Like subscribed to our email list, right? So we were talking about, after one of our convergences, actually last year, we were like, what if we create a space that to continue the conversations and continue to take care of each other. So we came up with this ethnic studies community of care space where we meet every month to have no agenda, have no sort of, you need to come and talk about your research type of thing, or you need to come and talk about whatever you need to talk about. It's really just a space for you to vent. We provide resources. We actually have, Layla, who is a social worker and a therapist with us every month, because sometimes the conversations can get very heavy, and I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, and she has been wonderful. She has been wonderful just managing conversations and guiding us through conversations that are hard. I also want to recognize that I'm not the only one moderating this community of care, but I do it along Dee, who is an amazing person, and I wish she was here, but I know she's here in spirit. And yeah, this space is just, sometimes we read tarot cards. Sometimes we just talk about what happened with our, life. And sometimes people zoom in from their bathrooms or their parks and spaces that are not very, you don't really see in other parts. And we just create a space where you can, vent and contribute to the conversation. So with that being said, our first ever community of care was, was last year, Saturday, August 26th, and our next community of care is this March, 2024. But I also wanted to share, I'm sorry, I got, ahead of the game, but we practice this beautiful thing that's called acompañamiento, and what that means is we walk alongside you in your walk of life, and we think about the holistic person, and if you're a mom, if you are a single parent, we think about all of the ways in which the community of care can support you. So yeah, if you want to acompañarnos and walk with us, come at the end of this month.
All right. What do we have? So what have we learned by working with each other and in community, like as the phrase, in community, along the way? Does someone want to speak to this one?
Yeah, I can start this off. I know you're gonna jump.
I already said today.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
We'll see. Well, yeah, no, I just wanted to, this is actually a really great opportunity for us, because we don't really get to do this kind of reflective and kind of storytelling and archiving ourselves, because we're constantly having meetings and what's the next thing, right? But the community of care allows us to slow down a little bit as well. reflect together and kind of tell the bigger story a little bit. So thank you for this. But I wanted to add this moment because I think we've been doing this on a volunteer basis. This is kind of the work that we do. I'm sure folks are involved in a lot of other things, but this is something that we do apart from the main source of income, right? But I'm just, you know, we've been able to do so much, right? And working collectively, which is kind of new for me. I've very much been kind of a loner all of my life, so you know, I've had some organizing experience before, but this is the first experience where like I actually feel like I'm working collectively with folks. Like it's where they're picking up, doing some things that I know I can't do, it wouldn't even have thought of, like putting together this whole slide presentation, which came together super fast. But just kind of feeding off of the conversations yesterday, I just wanted to kind of point out a few things that I think at least I've learned through doing this work, and through doing this sort of work in practice, right? And one of the things I can say is that, kind of riffing on the shirt too that I'm wearing, the institutions don't define us, our relationships do, right? And the other part of that is that our relationships also extend well beyond institutions, right? So that, I know that this came up a lot yesterday, like, can we decolonize the academy? Can we dismantle the academy? And obviously, you know, there's a lot of limits to that. But what you also find, what I also kind of see is that a lot of what we've been able to do is kind of like sneaking across the borders, right, of institutions from both sides. So like, when I first started doing these calls, I was an employee at TCU, right, and then left, became a graduate student, but we kept doing the work, we kept the community, and we actually found each other afterwards. The person I was sitting next to yesterday, Lynette, government employee, she works right for a district, and yet she's stuck with this project. Even a month ago, when the TASBOE, you know, tried to pause the whole train, her district could have just said, you know what, we're done, this has gotten political, it's up to the activists to take this course the rest of the way. And they haven't. She was doing interviews. They did back off a little, I'm not gonna lie. But they've, you know, still, she hasn't dropped the project, right? They're sticking with it. So what I'm trying to get at is that there's kind of a porous borders between the institution and the community, between the state and non-state spaces, and that we can use that. Right? We always do. We find ways to do it. Conservatives do it all the time, right? There's a revolving door between the industry and politics and all that. So why do we need to respect those borders, right? Why do we need to feel like we gotta choose? I gotta be like an institution person or I'm a community person, right? You don't have to choose. And you know, you realize that even in community spaces, there's reflections of the systems of power that we don't like in universities that you have to work against anyway, right? So I think that's been part of our power, and it's the last thing, one of the people that was serving as a facilitator for the coalition is actually now running for the state board, district 11? District 12 in the Round Rock area. Franca Science, if you're in that area, support her. Ethnic studies scholar, and she won her primary, and we'll see if she can beat Maynard, but you know, I'm glad she did that. And this has been a strategy for conservatives for the State Board of Ed for the past 2 years, is to take over the SBOE, and I think it's dangerous to let them have free reign to do that, right? So she's stepping in, and hopefully she can contribute in that. We have a few other folks that are very pro-ethnic studies that are also running for the state board seats. So, yeah.
So if you'd like to join the community of care, you're welcome to get to the QR that will take you to
The Facebook group.
the Facebook group. So if you are interested in joining, you can already, you know, join and get the update and make sure to join us for that event. Here's a couple of other things that are just housekeeping things. If you're interested in collaborating in any way, if you'd be interested in just listening in and not really doing anything, lurking is perfectly acceptable. We have both the AINS support guide, so thinking about writing letters to people in positions of power in support of the course you heard about yesterday. All different ways that we can leverage our collective voices. And then we also have the Ethnic Studies Network of Texas membership form, which will add you to the email list, so that whenever there are meetings or quarterly updates or big events happening or we have to mobilize letters, or folks are available and interested in Austin to testify on our behalf, any of those things make a big impact, right? Our collective voice makes a big impact. And the one piece that I just want to add is, which you've already noticed here, right? The beauty of having such a diverse collective is that you don't have to be in charge of any particular thing. You contribute whatever is in your realm, whatever you're good at, whatever you feel moved to contribute, and it's worked really well for us to be so diverse and eclectic and kind of talk through all of the different ways that we can mobilize and envision something really different than what we have in front of us. So this is probably the one activity that we're going to...
Can I say something?
Sure,
about
please,
the-
please, please.
Just because I know this came up yesterday, just really encourage you to check out the AIN support guide. Are folks going to have access to the slide?
We can offer it, yeah.
Okay.
Share it out.
Okay. If your organization, especially your student organization, or even an academic department, we are still taking letters of support for the course itself. There's also a sign-on letter. It's much easier. You just kind of put in your logo and you put in the support for the course. And this is very much live. We are in the heat of battle for that. We're trying to get the course back on the agenda in April 8th or 9th.
With the State Board of
At the
Education.
State Board of Education. So definitely there's work that can be done to support ethnic studies. For how many high school students are there in Texas? 300,000 or million? 1.6
There's
million?
like 7 million students, not only in high school.
Okay.
Two?
Millions of
1.5?
students, right? Trying to give
They're all
millions of
coming
students access to course in American Indian Native Studies, and they deserve it. So check it out, please.
Okay. Should we move to the discussion question?
Yeah.
Yep.
So we were going to do a Mentimeter that collects a word cloud. We want to skip right to discussion. Good. So pair share means you turn to the person next to you. Sometimes teachers say your elbow partner. What are some of the practices of solidarity that you have seen or that you involve in your own life, in your own practices as you go about? Or things that you've heard of other people doing? What are some of the practices of solidarity? Turn to your neighbor, any neighbor, 3 neighbors, doesn't matter. Turn to someone and please talk to someone. What are some of the practices of solidarity that you either do or that you've seen? Don't look at me. can say an idea that you heard and are inspired by from the other people you were speaking with. Or you can just invent some amazing creative thing to inspire all of us. But part of why we're going to share it as a whole group, a whole round about this big circle, is that it's collective thinking that really has pushed all of this through all of these years and all of these contexts. And what you heard were all of the good parts, right? And what we know about memory is that when we are traumatized, we don't form memories. So why can none of us remember the beginning of the pandemic? Because that's what trauma does to your brain. You don't remember. George Floyd happened. The world shut down. People were dying. It was really scary. Not how it is today. How it was then was really scary. And everything you just heard had that context of like how I just need to find people. How do I find people? We're stuck in our houses like a bunch of separate space stations. Right? How do I find people? How do I figure out how to laugh anymore? How do I do anything? And so all of that, which is to say, this is how we remember. And when we can collectively come together, right, and share the stories and be in community and be reminded how we survived, those are the stories of survivance, right? So part of the closing circle is to remind us all there's lots of different ways that we can understand solidarity, come into solidarity, and then also practice being in solidarity with different communities wherever you call home, right? The home where your ancestors are buried, the home where you just open the door and that is your space, the home where loved ones are there to catch you, any which way you identify home. It's all parts of how do you find and make space and find that nurturance. Right? So the question is, how might you use what you've either said, what you've heard, what you've witnessed, or what you want to invent for us? Or you have the right to pass. I'm going to start with what I have started pedagogically when students feel really heavy, and because I work with a bunch of practicing K-12 teachers, we do something really silly. We will do 2 minutes of flamenco dancing because it lets you stomp that shit out. Throw it off of you and it's not yours anymore, and you do the attitude. And then 2 minutes, and then you can be centered. And no matter what kind of day anyone has had, it's effective. And we can think, and we can talk, and we can be. Right?
Okay, the best thing that I think of and we have discussed to do in solidarity is food. Like, especially with whom I want to make, I want to bond, but I know that I don't really bond with that person, but I need to or I want to. The best thing is invite that person to, to my house or maybe a shared space, exchange food. I think that's my idea.
You also mentioned something that I do in my class is we use music, right? So music is a tool to teach, but also as a tool to listen together, engage, have a sonic register. That doesn't necessarily mean, it means listening and listening deeply and kind of teaching that practice of deep listening. So that's a way that I think solidarity can be expressed in a nonverbal way, for sure.
So I run a program in New Mexico called the CARE program. It's a collective action and resistance education. So it's a transformative justice program for high school students. And they are just not about it when we come in. They don't trust us. It's just not the regular thing for them that they're learning every day. And so the way that we have been able to not break their barriers, but for them to trust us is food. They love to eat, but also poetry. Just writing. They don't even know what poetry
I have access to reserve all the rooms, and I have a whole stack of parking passes in my desk. And, you know, not that everybody wants to come to the university, but sometimes you do. I also, my whole backyard is literally designed to hold salons of like 25, 30 people just for us to be together. So I think creating spaces is something that I can do.
I think about how the BDS movement can be on a micro level in the grocery store and being able to scan barcodes and know if a company is invested in settler colonialism and being able to put that brand down and never shop and then share that brand and how they are perpetuating violence. And I think that is the best way within a grocery store to show solidarity in that one moment.
An example I use is that on campus, one of my professors hosts a queer art of drag class. And so in our class, we had both queer individuals as well as like straight individuals join the class. So it's like the act of solidarity there. And for me personally, I'm a Nosabo kid, but I want to appreciate that I was born here because my family members did it for me, and they went through all those troubles of coming across from Mexico to here. And so I'm learning Spanish now, and I'm also queer, so it can be kind of hard in like a person of color family. And so my drag persona is a luchador, and so I'm using both like being queer as well as Mexicana in order to bring that solidarity culture together.
She does a great job, guys. You guys should go. Are you guys in the drag show this semester? You guys need to come see her. She's great. But I think what we discussed is boycotting. I think boycotting to me is a great source of solidarity. I use the example of Starbucks, what's going on right now with Palestine. And I remember when I was in London and first hearing about the information I was gathering. For context, I walked past the BBC every day to go to class. So I saw, like, of course, like Israeli protest outside of the BBC, and I'm like, I was just slowly learning what was going on. And, you know, when I started learning about the boycott, it made me feel more in solidarity with the cause. Because I'm like, I'm not sacrificing anything, but if I'm willing to just give up one thing that really doesn't mean much to me, I know that I'm standing with this movement, and even if it's a small thing, just not going to buy a drink. So I think solidarity with boycotting is also a really big deal.
I was thinking of a couple of things, but one is continue to remind academia in general about bringing in community and making space for different types of knowledge and engaging in more praxis than just knowledge and theory, right? I think those two things are important. And the other thing that I was thinking was totally different was the languages of love came to my mind, and just thinking about ways that each person in my life and in the work that we do needs to be recognized and be seen. I have a tendency to always go to acts of service, and I think every person has a different way that they want to be recognized in the space, so being more attentive to that.
So I'm thinking about relationship and accountability, and specifically I'm thinking about solidarity in terms of having the discernment to know when to speak and when to pass the mic.
Okay. All right. I feel a lot of pressure now. Okay, all right. You know, I'm just really full right now. I'm having a hard time putting my words together. When I was thinking about this, because I'm about, what is this month? Yeah, no. Whoa. So about 8 months
into this job of chairing a department that is kind of rebuilding and has been under fire at this institution. Like everybody, I really appreciate the positive things people have said about Chris, but I know that we have really had to deal with a lot of institutional pressure, and the fact that we're still here, I don't take it for granted. But I also would say, for myself coming into this job, I was like very humbled because I have my expertise, but that is not the whole of ethnic studies. Ethnic studies is a wide-ranging, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary space, anti-disciplinary space. And I was like, let's have a conference. And we have like, me and Louise, who had to step out, we're the 2 faculty in this department right now. Thankfully, we've hired 2 more people, but then that makes 4. And people were looking at me like, are you crazy? 2 people? But we have so many people outside of our department invested in making this department work, like my colleagues and people who have put in effort when they didn't have to. Because that's not what's in their job description. They're not hired into our department. And so I'm gonna wrap kind of just by saying in terms of what I'm processing, I'm coming from a deep space of humility and knowing that when you have access to resources, the best thing you can do is use them so that people can come together and resist together and fight together and build together. And that to me is something that I see as the thing I want this department to be. And that's ongoing work, and that is a big part of what I feel like the chart, there's Louise, you're here. Okay, I'm so sorry. But just thinking about the incredible responsibility we have to one another, right? I'm thinking about a quote by Gwendolyn Brooks, we are each other's harvest, we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond. And that to me is something that I find sacred in this room and that I'm gonna carry with me out of it. And so I just really appreciate the reflection.
So I'm an independent Indigenous educator, and I've worked with Ethnic Studies Network of Texas. I'm on the AIMS committee, and so I'm going to just keep continuing to do the education that I do, community-based as well as, through the Ethnic Studies Network and all the things that we do with all of that. I'm just going to keep doing that and also continuing educating my radical Indigenous teens that I teach at home. So just continued education all the way.
I forgot your name. Abel. You mentioned showing up. Like that is so important. It's just showing up to certain things. I recently just started showing up to a bunch of these demonstrations, especially for Palestine. And I mean, you had the writer's strike in LA. You had the auto union that was also on strike, the hotel workers on strike. There's so many people on strike in LA. But showing up to them is so important. I get an email from my union and say, hey, show some solidarity and come up to represent us. And I said, I was gonna go anyway, but yeah, cool, I'll go. And I usually bring instruments because that's what I do. I love music, and someone else mentioned music too. But I mean, I firmly believe that anybody can play an instrument, and it doesn't even have to be an instrument. It could just be a noisemaker, like I like to call them. You just grab a bucket and just bang on it. And it's so important when you hand a bucket to someone, and they have no experience with music, but once they have the bucket, they feel like a musician. And that's exactly the feeling that I've wanted to give them, because anybody can be a musician, and anybody can show that solidarity within that moment by just banging on a bucket.
One of the things I was reflecting on, especially as I spoke with Alexis, is solidarity is about relationships. And when we think about sort of relationships, I think about my partner and our relationship, and sometimes when we get upset or something's going wrong, she developed this thing where she said, do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged right now? And for me, I think that applies, beyond that context of other relationships. I also think about it, when I think of my students, or when I think of, being in other spaces of, let me be a chess piece. Like, where do you want me to be? Kind of like what Abel said. Do you want me to go away and pass the mic, or do you want me to, use my power within the institution, or do you just want me to hear you out at the moment, right? 'Cause you need some space to vent. Just again, being kind of like that chess piece that can move where you need it to be moved at a particular time.
Hello. So when I was talking to Dr. Romero, I had brought up about how I was kind of reflecting over the panel yesterday. But more specifically, like I was thinking just more about like my relationships with Pam and Jacora, and how like especially for like the last several months, like working on research and applying to grad school and that entire process, like what I found to be solidarity was like our sharing of knowledge, which is exactly what we're doing here. But I feel like solidarity isn't just like what I was explaining to Dr. Romero was like something that's big or like with many people, but something that's just with another person and being able to contribute to each other's library. And then someone said yesterday about I think activism can be silly, which is something I walked away from that I really enjoyed. And so just even in how like activism can be silly, and that could be a space in which solidarity can also be a part of our shared library.
Before getting into mine, I want to point out Dr. McCormick's practices of solidarity, which I have stolen a little bit, but she does a care work bingo in every one of her classes that we get assigned throughout the semester, and it's kind of like, how are you taking care of yourself? We've done the flamenco dancing in her class. It wasn't flamenco.
Yes.
What was it?
Not bomba, but something like Dr.
Something similar.
Puente. Yeah.
Right. So I just wanted to say I appreciate you for that. But for me personally, as somebody who works and studies on this campus, and I've noticed that being in an institution that has a lot of students that deal with food insecurity, housing access, the refusal to work with those students to get them some kind of housing on or off campus, and how inaccessible this campus really just is, I think resource sharing is something that we practice among ourselves, especially as students, or just students of color really. We see someone and it's like, okay, look, here's this food pantry on campus. Look at this event that's going to have food. Meal swipes, right? So like we have meal plans, some of us have our meal plans covered. We'll just share it with people because we're not going to use it and it's not our money, it's institutional money.
Even like from this event last night, I took 5 or 6 boxes back
Right.
to my door.
So things like that, and even if we don't have resources in here or know what could be helped, we reach out to people who may have resources for our disabled friends or anybody dealing with any circumstance like that, and I think that's very beautiful, and I don't really see that outside of our department in CRES or the Intercultural Center, which is where I work.
Yeah, Pam and I talked about the idea of resource sharing. Sometimes the resources are not material, sometimes they're emotional, spiritual. Sometimes you just need to be there for colleagues, friends, people you're working with, and sometimes that's the solidarity that they need in the moment.
For me, I think the first step is just like showing up and listening, not just with your full attention, but with your full being and your full presence. And then part of it is that solidarity isn't a one-way relationship. It's not just listening, but it's being in relation with people. And so part of that is also sharing what you need and feeling comfortable in a relationship to be able to be what other people need, but then ask other people to show up and to be in relationship with you. And it's a two-sided relationship, many-sided relationship. So yeah.
So I actually thought of something totally different 2 minutes ago, but something within my own practices with my coworkers, people I organize with, people who are in the same program as me, is celebration and partying. I think that's an amazing way to build solidarity, just because it's causing a rupture in your daily lives. It causes a rupture in state surveillance, and to create those spaces of celebration and joy, I think, are really important.
practice that more, definitely. But a couple things that came to mind too is kind of building on what Karma said. A few folks have mentioned food. Something my partner and I did in the Rio Grande Valley is we had a kind of a community dinner for folks interested in ethnic studies locally. I'd like to do that in my hometown. I'm living in my hometown for next year, at least, which is also the same place my senator is Senator Creighton, who's the one that pushed a lot of the anti-tenure, anti-DEI stuff last year. And I was anxious to kind of like cause some trouble there. My community's become very diverse in the past 10, 15 years, a lot more people of color there. So I'd love to do something there and just see like, who's here now? Yeah, and the other thing with boycotts, I'm definitely thinking in that direction too of how can we start to harness our economic power, knowing that the electoral political system is very much stacked against us, but to just think through like how am I funding the very people that are oppressing me right now, you know? So and there's definitely a lot of companies, corporations that are funding a lot of these far-right folks that we use it every day, like Buc-ee's, HEB, and stuff like that. So I'm very curious in learning more about that.
Thank you. I recently moved across the country, so I live in Connecticut now, but I still live in Texas in a lot of ways. And so I think I was thinking when folks were talking earlier about what Mariam Okaba says about talk to your neighbors, and that this isn't right, but she says basically like nothing meaningful is done on your own. And I think in my particular positionality and in where I live, our town held a resolution for a ceasefire a couple weeks ago, and there was 5 hours of public testimony online and in person. And just, I know now what some of my neighbors think and how I'm aligned with some of my neighbors and not aligned with some of my neighbors. And it's a really challenging thing because I don't like social interaction. But I think in my positionality, there's a way to reach out and reach across and listen to people and to be in solidarity with the folks up here through talking to folks who maybe wouldn't be in solidarity. And so how to keep having a conversation, open a conversation, meet people where they are, in part because of our frustration with electoral politics. Like, we're gonna save each other, we're gonna be with each other. So just building those relationships in my new community, that's my task for myself.
I think listening to everyone here, I do most of what you all do. So, but a particular thing that I've been just very proud of is, you know, just connecting with the people here and being in community with folks that, you know, can share their experiences and understand that, you know, we are living in a weird moment, and just being in community with those that are living with me is very healing.
So the last thing I'd like us to do, if you don't mind, thank you everyone for sharing your ideas. Look at all those amazing ideas we came up with, right? We practiced some ideas, you talked to your neighbor, we came up with a giant list. That's what this is about, collective thinking. The last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna embody the practice. So I'm gonna put down the mic, we're all gonna stand up. Ready? Okay, you need hands empty. Ready? First things first, take care of yourself. Everyone in this circle respects your boundaries. Take care of yourself first. This is a practice that comes from some elders. I had the beautiful, delicious honor to study with some amazing elders doing my PhD up in Vancouver. And one of the folks who kind of supported my dissertation journey is a Stalo elder named Joanne Archibald. She's amazing. And one of her community elders is named Vince Stogon, and he has this long-standing practice that I think will help us all embody. So Lisa, come on, you're in the circle, my dears, come on. You don't want to pass, pass is okay. Watch, this is how it goes. Here's how it goes. Ready? teaching of one hand forward, one hand back. One hand forward because we're accepting the teachings of the people who came before us, right? And one hand back because we're going to help the people that are behind us. So let's start with one hand back. Take your left hand and hold it upright. You don't have to take the other person's hand if you don't want to. Like, protect those boundaries. The energetic practice is how you feel in your body. Left hand upward. That's the one hand backward where you're receiving things. And then take your right hand and put it on top of, energetically, the palm that's in front of you. One hand forward, one hand back, right? And in your body, take a minute and feel what your hands feel like right now. Because this is the collective. This is how we raise all boats, right? You accept the teachings, you pass on the teachings through mentorship, through making space, through showing up, through passing the mic.